Hey guys, tonight we begin not with ancient Venice or dusty theater stages, but with something far more relatable and dangerous. Co-signing a loan for your best friend. Because believe it or not, putting your name on someone else's debt in 1990s, Miami was somehow even riskier than lending them your Netflix password. From Wall Street wannabes to inheritance tests involving mysterious safes, this tale of friendship is less about loyalty points and more about literal pounds of flesh. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's drift back to the sun-drenched shores of Miami in 1993, where Art Deco buildings meet dangerous deals, and where one man's desperate gamble will test the limits of friendship, justice, and mercy. The summer heat of Miami in 1993 hangs thick over Biscayne Bay like a wet blanket, shimmering above the turquoise water where million-dollar yachts bob lazily at their moorings. The Art Deco buildings of South Beach stand pastel and pristine against an impossibly blue sky, their geometric facades catching the late afternoon sun. Along Ocean Drive, palm trees sway in the humid breeze while convertibles cruise past outdoor cafes where beautiful people sip mojitos and pretend not to notice each other. This is a city of surfaces, where everything gleams with fresh paint and new money, where the old Cuban establishments of Little Havana exist alongside the glittering towers of Brickell Avenue, where legitimate business and darker enterprises flow together like rivers meeting the sea. Antonio Vasquez stands on the deck of his warehouse facility at the port of Miami, watching a cargo ship being unloaded by massive cranes that swing shipping containers through the air like children's blocks. He's in his early 40s, wearing a guayabara shirt that's crisp despite the heat, his dark hair showing just a touch of silver at the temples. His company, Vasquez Import-Export, occupies a prime position along the Miami River, and his reputation in the shipping community is impeccable. Legitimate goods flow through his operation daily. Textiles from South America, electronics from Asia, coffee beans from Colombia, in bags stamped with authentic export licenses. He's built something real here, something clean, though he knows the waters he navigates are murky. In Miami, in this particular year, asking too many questions about what your neighbors are doing is a good way to end up feeding the fish. But Antonio's mind isn't on business today. There's a melancholy that settles over him like the humidity, a vague sadness he can't quite name. His 3 ships are currently at sea, carrying legitimate cargo worth millions, and yet he feels empty. Perhaps it's the isolation that comes with integrity in a city built on cocaine money. Perhaps it's the loneliness of being a man who plays by the rules in a game where everyone else is cheating. His best friend Bassanio Mercato arrives in a faded red Corvette that's seen better days, pulling into the warehouse parking lot with the characteristic rumble of an engine that needs work. Bassanio emerges from the car like a man stepping onto a stage, all charm and easy smiles, despite the warm quality of his linen suit. He's younger than Antonio by a decade, handsome in that effortless way that opens doors and creates opportunities, but those doors have been closing lately. Bassanio has expensive tastes and empty pockets, a dangerous combination in Miami where debt has a way of becoming fatal. Antonio, my brother, my savior, Bassanio calls out, embracing his friend with genuine warmth. They stand together against the backdrop of the port. Two men who've known each other since Bassanio was barely out of his teens, when Antonio took him under his wing and tried to teach him the shipping business. But Bassanio was never meant for honest work, not really. He's a promoter, a connector, someone who lives in the spaces between transactions, and in Miami's overheated economy of the early 90s, he's been swimming with sharks. Inside Antonio's office, with its ceiling fan spinning lazily and papers held down by paperweights, Bassanio paces like a caged animal. The office overlooks the Miami River, where smaller boats navigate between the commercial vessels, and through the window you can see the downtown skyline rising in the distance, all glass and steel and ambition. Bassanio has come here to ask for money. Again, and both men know it. "I owe you everything, Antonio," Bassanio begins, and there's genuine emotion in his voice, not just the practiced charm. "You've bailed me out more times than I can count. Money I borrowed from you, money I burned through like it was nothing, and I know I have no right to ask for more." Antonio waves this away with a tired gesture, settling into the leather chair behind his desk. The office smells of cigar smoke and salt air, and somewhere in the building a radio plays salsa music. "Whatever I have is yours, Bassanio. You know this. What do you need?" Bassanio stops pacing and looks out the window at the river, at the boats cutting through water that reflects the late afternoon sun like hammered gold. "There's a woman," he says, and Antonio almost smiles because, of course, there is Portia Montoya. Her father was Ricardo Montoya, the real estate developer. He died 6 months ago. Antonio nods slowly. He knows the name. Everyone in Miami knows the Montoya name. Ricardo Montoya built half of Coral Gables, developed luxury condominiums along the coast, turned swampland into million-dollar properties. He was old money by Miami standards, Cuban aristocracy who fled Castro with their fortune intact, who rebuilt their empire in exile and never looked back. When Ricardo died of a heart attack in his Coconut Grove mansion, he left behind a fortune estimated at over $50 million and one daughter, Portia, who by all accounts is as sharp as her father and twice as beautiful. "She's incredible, Antonio," Bassanio continues, and now there's something different in his voice, something that sounds almost like sincerity. "Not just beautiful, though she is like a dream, but smart, educated. She went to Yale, came back to manage her father's properties. And before you say it, yes, I know how it sounds. Bassanio Mercato, chasing another rich woman. But this is different. I met her at a charity gala 3 months ago. We talked for hours, and I swear to you, there was something real there." The desperation in his voice is palpable, and Antonio recognizes it as something beyond mere greed. Perhaps Bassanio sees in Portia a way out, a chance to become the man he's always pretended to be. Perhaps he actually loves her. Perhaps both things are true simultaneously, which would be very much in character for Bassanio. So what's the problem? Antonio asks, though he already knows the answer. Bassanio turns from the window, and his face is shadowed against the bright light behind him. Her father's will. Ricardo Montoya was an eccentric man, and he didn't trust anyone when it came to his daughter. The will states that any man who wants to marry Portia must pass a test. 3 safes in her father's study, 3 combination locks. One contains the terms of a prenuptial agreement that would give the suitor access to the full Montoya fortune. One contains a moderate inheritance, enough to be comfortable, but nothing spectacular. And one contains nothing but a letter disinheriting Portia entirely if she marries the man who chooses it. Antonio leans forward, intrigued despite himself. And how do the suitors know which safe to choose? They don't, Bassanio says. That's the point. Each safe has an inscription. The gold one says, "Who chooses me shall gain what many men desire." The silver one says, "Who chooses me shall get as much as he deserves." And the lead one says, "Who chooses me must give and hazard all he has." You get one choice. Choose wrong, and you must leave Miami immediately and never speak to Portia again. Those are the terms of the will, legally binding, and Portia has sworn to honor her father's wishes. It's insane. Antonio thinks the kind of control rich men try to exercise even from beyond the grave. But he can picture it clearly. The mansion in Coconut Grove with its Spanish colonial architecture, its walls the color of pale sand, its red tile roof and arched doorways. Inside, a study with dark wood paneling and leather-bound books, and 3 safes sitting on a mahogany table like a game show prize. Portia standing nearby in an elegant dress, her dark hair pulled back, her expression unreadable as men parade through to try their luck, each one thinking he's clever enough to decode her dead father's riddle. "So you need money to look the part," Antonio says, understanding now. "You can't show up at the Montoya mansion looking like a man who's one missed payment away from having his kneecaps broken." Bassanio winces at the bluntness, but nods. "I owe money to some very dangerous people, Antonio. The kind who don't send collection agencies. I've been stalling them, making promises, but they're losing patience. Before I can even think about Portia, about choosing the right safe, I need to clear my debts and present myself as a legitimate suitor. I need a new car, proper clothes, enough cash to look like someone who belongs in her world. $20,000 would do it. Maybe 25 to be safe." Antonio considers this, drumming his fingers on the desk. Outside, a tugboat sounds its horn, the noise echoing across the water. "My capital is all tied up at the moment," he says slowly. "I have 3 ships at sea. One is due back from São Paulo in 2 weeks with a cargo of coffee and leather goods. Another is returning from Kingston with rum and textiles. The third is on a longer route, coming from Buenos Aires with electronics and wine. When they arrive, I'll have plenty of liquidity. But right now, everything I have is invested in those shipments." The disappointment on Bassanio's face is crushing, but then Antonio continues. "However, my credit in this city is excellent. I can use my reputation as collateral and borrow the money you need. When my ships come in, I'll repay the loan with interest. There are people who will lend on my name alone." Bassanio's face lights up with hope and gratitude, and he crosses the office to grip Antonio's shoulders. "You would do this for me? Even after everything, after all the money I've already burned through?" "You're my brother in everything but blood," Antonio says simply. "If you truly love this woman, if this is your chance to become the man you're capable of being, then I'll help you. Besides," he adds with a slight smile, "maybe I'm betting on you the way Ricardo Montoya is betting on his daughter's judgment. Maybe this time you'll choose the right safe." They shake hands, and the deal is made between friends, the way deals have always been made in Miami, with trust and hope and the understanding that everything could fall apart at any moment. The city outside the window is turning gold in the fading light, the water of the bay reflecting the colors of approaching sunset. all orange and pink and purple like a tropical painting. But there's a problem, and both men know it. Antonio's usual contacts, the banks and legitimate lenders who respect his reputation, won't move fast enough. Bassanio needs this money within days, not weeks. The kind of people he owes don't accept delayed payment plans, and the longer he waits, the more interest accumulates, both financial and the kind measured in threats and violence. "There's Shylock," Bassanio says quietly, almost reluctantly, and the name hangs in the air between them like smoke. Antonio's expression hardens immediately, his jaw tightening. The warmth that was there moments ago vanishes, replaced by something cold and bitter. No, not him. Antonio, he's the only one who can move this kind of money quickly. He operates outside the banks, outside the normal channels. He's a loan shark, yes, but he's also a businessman. He lends to half the developers in Miami. Shylock Stein runs his operation out of a pawn shop in the Design District, a neighborhood of warehouses and art galleries where the city's creative class intersects with its criminal element. The shop is called Stein Financial Services, a deliberately bland name for a place where desperate people come to trade jewelry, watches, and dignity for cash they need immediately. But behind the pawn shop is something bigger, a lending operation that finances everything from small business ventures to real estate, deals to the kind of transactions that never appear on tax returns. Shylock is a loan shark with a calculator and a long memory, a man who's been shunned by the mainstream financial community despite his wealth and success. Antonio has history with Shylock, the kind of history that leaves scars. They've crossed paths in the Miami business community for years, and Antonio has never hidden his contempt. He's publicly criticized Shylock's lending practices, called him a predator who profits from other people's desperation, refused to do business with anyone who works with him. It's personal and professional, and underneath it all is something uglier, something Antonio doesn't like to examine too closely in himself. The Design District in 1993 is a neighborhood in transition, caught between its industrial past and an artistic future that's just beginning to emerge. Converted warehouses house galleries where local painters display work next to imported furniture showrooms. The streets are wider here than in South Beach, less glamorous, more functional. Graffiti covers walls in some places, while in others murals are beginning to appear, the first signs of gentrification. During the day, delivery trucks rumble past loading docks. At night, the area takes on a different character, darker and more dangerous, where shadows pool between streetlights and locked gates protect valuable inventory. Stein Financial Services occupies a corner building painted a faded yellow, with barred windows displaying watches, guitars, electronics, and jewelry arranged on worn velvet. A neon sign flickers in the window. Cash loans, best rates, immediate approval. The interior smells of old leather and desperation, with fluorescent lights humming overhead and display cases running along both walls. Behind bulletproof glass sits the main counter, where transactions are conducted with the efficiency of a bank and the warmth of a prison. Shylock Stein is in his late 50s, lean and sharp-featured, with gray hair cut short and reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. He wears simple clothes, a short-sleeved button-down shirt and dark slacks, nothing flashy or expensive. He doesn't need to advertise his wealth. Everyone who comes through his door already knows he has it. His office is in the back, accessible through a heavy door with multiple locks, and it's there that the real business happens. away from the pawn shop floor with its sad parade of people trading possessions for temporary relief. The office is surprisingly neat, almost austere. A metal desk holds a computer, one of those chunky monitors that dominates half the surface, along with neat stacks of paperwork, a calculator, and a small menorah that seems out of place among the cold efficiency of the space. The walls are bare, except for a framed photograph of a young woman, dark-haired and smiling, wearing a graduation cap and gown. Filing cabinets line one wall, containing records of every loan, every transaction, every debt owed. Shylock keeps meticulous records. In his business, memory and documentation are everything. When Antonio and Bassanio arrive, Shylock looks up from his computer screen with an expression that registers surprise, then calculation, then something that might be satisfaction. Antonio Vasquez, the righteous merchant, the man who's publicly called him a bloodsucker, a parasite, a disgrace to the Miami business community, standing in his office asking for something. The irony is delicious. Antonio Vasquez, Shylock says, rising from his chair but not offering his hand. I never thought I'd see you darken my doorway. You've made your feelings about my business quite clear over the years. What was it you called me at the Chamber of Commerce meeting last year? A predatory lender who should be run out of Miami. No, wait. I believe your exact words were the kind of scum that gives honest businessmen a bad name. Antonio stands rigid, his jaw clenched, while Bassanio shifts uncomfortably beside him. The office feels smaller suddenly, more claustrophobic, and through the small window that looks out onto an alley, you can see a dumpster overflowing with trash, a stray cat picking through the refuse. I need to borrow $25,000, Antonio says, his voice flat and controlled. It's for Bassanio here. I'm willing to put up my business as collateral. The loan will be repaid within 3 months, when my ships return to port. Shylock removes his glasses and cleans them slowly with a cloth from his desk drawer, a deliberate gesture that makes Antonio wait. 25,000, 3 months. And what interest rate were you thinking would be appropriate? Whatever your standard rate is, Antonio says, though the words seem to physically pain him. I understand you charge 12% for short-term commercial loans. 15% for someone with your credit history, Shylock corrects, then pauses. Oh, wait, you don't have a credit history with me, do you? Because you've never deigned to do business with a Jew before. You borrow from your respectable banks, your country club friends, your Catholic credit unions. But now those sources aren't moving fast enough, are they? Now you need someone who operates outside business hours, someone who doesn't require loan committees and approval processes. Now you need Shylock. The tension in the room thickens like the humidity outside. Antonio's face flushes with anger and shame, the two emotions warring visibly across his features. Bassanio places a hand on his friend's arm, a silent plea for restraint, but Antonio shakes it off. You're right, Antonio says, and the admission seems to cost him something. I've called you those things and worse, and I'd call you them again. You profit from misery, Shylock. You prey on people when they're desperate, when they have nowhere else to turn. You charge interest rates that trap them in debt they can never escape. I've seen businesses destroyed by your loans, families ruined. Shylock leans back in his chair, and his expression shifts from satisfaction to something harder, something carved from years of accumulated bitterness. You've seen businesses destroyed? Let me tell you what I've seen, Antonio. I've seen you spit at my feet outside the Port Authority building. I've seen you cross the street to avoid shaking my hand at charity functions. I've heard you tell other merchants not to do business with me, not because my terms are unfair, but because I'm Jewish. You call me a predator, but you treat me like I'm less than human. The words hang in the air, undeniable and ugly. Through the office walls, the muffled sound of someone arguing with the pawn shop clerk filters through, a woman pleading for more money for her wedding ring. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead, casting everything in a harsh, clinical glow. You lend money at interest rates that should be illegal, Antonio counters, but his voice lacks its earlier certainty. I lend money at rates that reflect risk, Shylock responds coldly. When banks won't touch someone when their credit is destroyed, when they need cash immediately and have nowhere else to go, they come to me. Yes, I charge high interest, but I also take enormous risks. How many of your Chamber of Commerce friends would lend money to a man like Bassanio here, who's known throughout Miami for burning through cash and dodging creditors? No one. But I will, because I understand desperation, because I've lived on the margins my entire life. Shylock stands and walks to the window, looking out at the alley where the afternoon light is starting to fade. His reflection in the glass shows a man who's aged beyond his years, worn down by constant battles for respect in a city that's never fully accepted him. My father came to Miami in 1961, fled from Castro with nothing but the clothes on his back and a watch sewn into the lining of his jacket. The Cuban Jews, we weren't welcome in your exile community, Antonio. He turns back to face them, and there's something different in his expression now, something calculating and dangerous. But here's what I propose, Antonio. I'll lend Bassanio the $25,000, and I'll charge no interest whatsoever. Both Antonio and Bassanio stare at him in disbelief. Outside, a car alarm starts wailing, the sound echoing between the warehouse buildings. No interest? Antonio repeats slowly. What's the catch? A smile crosses Shylock's face, thin and mirthless. Call it an investment in goodwill. Call it my chance to prove I'm not the monster you think I am. Of contempt carry weight, but there will be a bond, a contract, and its terms will be these. You will repay the $25,000 within 3 months. If you fail to repay, the penalty will be this. I get to take 1 pound of flesh from your body, cut from wherever I choose. A symbolic gesture, you understand. A reminder that debts have consequences, that words and accusations and years. The office suddenly feels airless, suffocating. Bassanio's face has gone pale, and he's shaking his head, backing toward the door. No, absolutely not. Antonio, this is insane. We'll find another way. But Antonio is staring at Shylock with a mixture of disgust and defiance. You're joking. This is some kind of sick game. Do I look like I'm joking? Shylock asks quietly. You've treated me like a villain for years, Antonio. So let's make it official. Let's put it in writing. Either your ships come in, you repay the loan, and you get to walk away having done business with the Jew you despise. Or your ships don't come in, and you learn what it feels like to be marked, to be cut, to carry a scar that reminds you every day of what contempt costs. Antonio's laugh is short and bitter, echoing off the bare walls. You expect me to believe you'd actually do it? That you'd cut flesh from my body over a debt? This is 1993, Shylock, not the Middle Ages. There are laws, courts, police. You'd go to prison for assault, for attempted murder? Then you have nothing to fear, Shylock says smoothly, returning to his desk and pulling out a legal pad. If the bond is meaningless, if you're so certain your ships will return safely and on time, then sign it. Prove that your word is as good as you claim. Prove that you're willing to stand behind your friend with more than just empty promises. Bassanio grabs Antonio's arm, his voice urgent and pleading. Don't do this. Please. The money isn't worth it. We'll find another way. I'll talk to the people I owe, negotiate payment plans. This is madness. But Antonio pulls his arm free, and there's something almost reckless in his eyes now, a pride that won't bend. My ships are solid investments. The cargo is legitimate, the routes are safe, and I have insurance. There's no scenario where I can't repay this loan. And if signing this ridiculous bond proves to the entire Miami business community what kind of man Shylock really is, if it shows everyone that he's exactly the predator I've always said he was, then so be it. Shylock begins writing, his handwriting neat and precise. I want witnesses. We'll go to my lawyer, have the contract properly notarized. Everything legal, everything official. $25,000 interest-free, repayable in 3 months. And if not repaid, 1 pound of flesh from Antonio Vasquez's body, to be taken at my discretion. You'll sign it in front of witnesses, and then you can take your money and your moral superiority and walk out of here. The contract is drawn up within the hour. They drive in separate cars to a lawyer's office in downtown Miami, a glass tower where Shylock's attorney works on the 32nd floor with views of the entire city spread out below. The lawyer, a nervous man named Feldman, who clearly wishes he were anywhere else, reads the contract aloud in a conference room while the air conditioning hums and the late afternoon sun streams through floor-to-ceiling windows. The city below looks beautiful and terrible. All those buildings full of people making deals, breaking promises, living and dying by the choices they make. Antonio signs without hesitation, his signature bold and clear. Shylock signs opposite, and the contract is notarized with an official stamp that makes it legally binding. Cash changes hands, $25,000 in hundreds, counted carefully and placed in a leather briefcase that Bassanio clutches like a lifeline. They leave the office building and emerge onto Biscayne Boulevard, where traffic flows in both directions, and the smell of the bay carries on the evening breeze. You're a fool, Antonio, Shylock says before they part ways. But at least you're an honest fool. 3 months. I'll be counting the days. As Shylock drives away in his modest sedan, Bassanio turns to Antonio with anguish written across his face. What have you done? What have we done? I've helped my friend, Antonio says simply. Now go win your woman. Choose the right safe. Make this worth something. The scene shifts across the city to Coconut Grove, where the Montoya mansion sits on a property that stretches from the street to the waterfront, hidden behind walls covered in bougainvillea and high iron gates. The house itself is a masterpiece of Spanish colonial architecture, 3 stories of pale stucco with a red tile roof, arched windows with decorative iron grills, and a courtyard entrance with a fountain where water splashes musically over limestone. Royal palms line the circular driveway, and the manicured lawns are a green so vivid they look artificial in the tropical light. Inside, Portia Montoya sits in her father's study, a room that still smells of his cigars and cologne 6 months after his death. The walls are lined with built-in bookcases holding leather-bound volumes. The floor is covered in an antique Persian rug. and heavy mahogany furniture dominates the space. On a table in the center of the room sit 3 safes, just as Bassanio described. 1 gold, 1 silver, 1 lead, each with its cryptic inscription engraved on a brass plate. Portia is 28 years old, beautiful in a way that photographs can't quite capture, with dark eyes that miss nothing, and an intelligence that makes most men uncomfortable. She wears a simple white linen dress that somehow looks elegant rather than casual, and her dark hair falls loose around her shoulders. She's exhausted from the parade of suitors, from watching men she barely knows try to decode her father's test, from the weight of honoring a dead man's wishes when she'd rather be running the business empire he left behind. Portia's companion and closest friend is Nerissa Lopez, a sharp-witted woman in her mid-20s who serves as both personal assistant and confidant. Nerissa sits on the leather sofa near the window, reviewing a stack of documents related to the Montoya real estate holdings, while Portia stares at the 3 safes with barely concealed frustration. Through the tall windows you can see the waterfront property extending down to a private dock where a yacht bobs gently in the water, white and gleaming against the blue of the bay. "Another one this morning," Nerissa says without looking up from her papers. "The Argentinian, Diego something. Very confident, very handsome, very wrong." Portia sighs and moves to the window, looking out at the manicured grounds where a gardener trims hedges with electric shears. He chose the gold safe. They always choose the gold safe. Who chooses me shall gain what many men desire. They think it straightforward that what many men desire must be the fortune. They don't stop to consider that what many men desire might be worthless. That popularity isn't the same as value. Your father was a cruel genius, Nerissa observes, setting down the documents. He's controlling your life from beyond the grave. He was protecting me, Portia says, but her voice lacks conviction. He wanted to make sure I didn't marry someone who only wanted the money, someone who couldn't see past the surface. The gold safe contains nothing but a piece of paper that says all that glitters is not gold. The silver safe, the one that promises as much as he deserves, contains a photograph of my father and a letter explaining that no man deserves a woman's fortune simply by marriage. And the lead safe, the ugly one that demands you give and hazard all you have, that's where the real prize is hidden. She turns from the window, and there's something vulnerable in her expression, a crack in the polished exterior. But what if the right man never comes? What if they all choose wrong? I'm bound by this will, Nerissa. I can't just choose for myself. I have to wait, have to watch them parade through here like it's a game show, have to smile and be gracious while they fail over and over again. Nerissa stands and crosses to her friend, placing a hand on her shoulder. The right one will come. Someone who sees past the gold, who understands that real value requires risk, who's willing to hazard everything for love rather than grab at the obvious prize. Through the house comes the sound of the doorbell, its chime echoing through marble hallways. Moments later, the housekeeper, an older Cuban woman named Rosa, who's worked for the Montoya family for 30 years, appears in the doorway of the study. She's wearing a traditional uniform black dress with a white apron, and her face shows the weariness of someone who's seen too much tragedy in one lifetime. "Miss Portia, there's a gentleman here to see you. A Mr. Crown from New York. He says he has an appointment." Portia exchanges a glance with Nerissa and straightens her dress, composing herself. "Send him in, Rosa. Let's see what New York has to offer." Marcus Crown enters the study like he owns it, all East Coast confidence. and designer suit. He's in his early 40s, silver-haired and square-jawed, with the kind of tan that comes from Caribbean vacations and the kind of watch that costs more than most people's cars. He's a Wall Street type, displaced to Miami for business opportunities, the kind of man who sees the city as a playground and its people as potential acquisitions. His handshake is too firm, his cologne too strong, and his eyes calculate Portia's worth before he's even fully through the door. "Miss Montoya, a pleasure," he says, his voice carrying that particular blend of charm and condescension that certain wealthy men perfect. "I've heard so much about you and your father's unique selection process. I find it refreshingly old-fashioned, a way to separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak." Portia gestures to the safes, her expression professionally pleasant, but revealing nothing. "The rules are simple, Mr. Crown. You choose one safe. If you choose correctly, you win my hand in marriage and access to the Montoya fortune. If you choose incorrectly, you must leave Miami immediately and never attempt to contact me again. Those are the terms of my father's will." Crown circles the safes like a predator, studying each inscription with exaggerated thoughtfulness. The gold safe gleams under the study's recessed lighting, its surface polished to a mirror shine. The silver safe is more understated, but still elegant, its brushed metal surface catching the light. The lead safe looks almost ugly by comparison, dull and heavy, its inscription barely visible in the dim engraving. "What many men desire," Crown reads aloud, his finger tracing the inscription on the gold safe. "Well, that's obvious enough. Many men desire wealth, power, beautiful wives. This is clearly the correct choice." He smiles at Portia with complete confidence, the smile of a man who's never truly failed at anything, who's bought his way through every obstacle life has presented. "You're certain?" Portia asks, her voice neutral. "Absolutely. The gold represents what men desire, and what men desire is exactly what I'm here for." "Open it." Portia produces a small key and unlocks the gold safe. The mechanism clicks, and Crown pulls open the heavy door with a theatrical flourish. Inside is a single piece of paper, yellowed and formal, with her father's handwriting covering it in neat Spanish script. Crown's confident expression falters as he reads, then crumbles completely. "All that glitters is not gold," Portia translates, though Crown clearly understands. "Often have you heard that told. Many a man his life hath sold, but my outside to behold. Gilded tombs do worms enfold. Had you been as wise as bold, young in limbs, in judgment old, your answer had not been inscrolled. Fare you well, your suit is cold." Crown's face flushes red with anger and humiliation. He crumples the paper in his fist, and for a moment it seemed like he might argue, might refuse to accept the terms. But Nerissa is already holding the study door open, and Rosa appears as if summoned, ready to escort him out. The rules are absolute, enforced by lawyers and the terms of the will. "This is ridiculous," Crown mutters, but he's already moving toward the door, his Wall Street swagger deflated. "A circus. Your father was insane. My father was careful," Portia replies coolly. "Have a safe trip back to New York, Mr. Crown." When he's gone, Portia sinks into her father's chair, and for a moment she looks impossibly tired. How many more, Nerissa? How many more fools choosing gold? How many more men who see only the surface? "Someone different will come," Nerissa assures her. "Someone who understands that the right choice isn't always the obvious one." Meanwhile, across the city, Bassanio is transforming himself. With Antonio's borrowed money in hand, with the weight of his friend's sacrifice pressing on his conscience, he's determined to become the man Portia deserves. He buys a new car, a black Mercedes sedan that gleams in the Miami sun, legitimate and expensive but not flashy. He purchases suits from a tailor on Miracle Mile in Coral Gables. Elegant linen and silk blends in cream and navy, clothes that suggest wealth without screaming it. He pays off his most dangerous debts, the ones that came with implicit threats, the ones that kept him looking over his shoulder on dark streets. He takes a room at the Biltmore Hotel in Coral Gables, that massive landmark with its copper-clad tower rising above the city like a monument to old Florida glamour. The hotel has been recently restored, its Mediterranean revival architecture pristine, its golf course green and perfect, its pool the size of a small lake. Bassanio's room overlooks the grounds, and at night he stands on the balcony smoking cigarettes and thinking about Antonio standing in Shylock's office, signing away a pound of his own flesh for friendship. The pressure is immense. Choose wrong and Antonio's sacrifice means nothing. Choose wrong and he has to leave Miami, leave Portia, leave behind the one chance he has at redemption. The three safes haunt his thoughts: gold, silver, lead. What many men desire, what he deserves, what requires hazarding everything. Which one holds the key to Portia's future, to his own salvation? He calls Portia from the hotel room phone, the receiver pressed to his ear, while he stares out at the Coral Gables skyline. She answers on the third ring, her voice professional but warmer when she realizes who's calling. "Bassanio, I was wondering if I'd hear from you. I want to try," he says simply. "I want to take the test, but I need you to know something first. I'm not a rich man, Portia. I've been living beyond my means for years, borrowing and spending and pretending to be something I'm not. The money I have now, it's borrowed from my best friend, who put everything on the line for me. I'm coming to you with debts paid but nothing else, no fortune, no impressive portfolio. Just myself." There's a pause on the line, and he can hear her breathing, can imagine her in that mansion by the water, holding the phone in her father's study. "That's more honesty than most men have offered," she says finally. "Come tomorrow, 4 in the afternoon. I'll be waiting." That night, while Bassanio prepares for the most important decision of his life, something shifts in Shylock's world. His daughter Jessica, 23 years old and restless, sits in her bedroom in their house in Aventura, a modest but comfortable home in a gated community where Shylock insisted on living despite his wealth. Her room is covered with posters of musicians, Nirvana and Pearl Jam, the grunge movement that defines youth culture in 1993. She wears ripped jeans and an oversized flannel shirt, the uniform of rebellion, and she's counting money she's stolen from her father's safe. Jessica has been suffocating under Shylock's control for years. He's protected to the point of imprisonment, suspicious of every friend she makes, dismissive of her dreams of art school and independence. To him, the world is hostile, and trust is a luxury they cannot afford. But Jessica is young and desperate for freedom, desperate to escape the weight of her father's bitterness and isolation. Her boyfriend Lorenzo waits outside in a convertible, a Puerto Rican kid from Hialeah with charm and empty pockets, all flash and no substance. He's promised her a different life, adventures, freedom from her father's suffocating house. She's packed a bag with clothes and taken $10,000 in cash from Shylock's home safe. Money she tells herself she deserves, money she's owed for years of feeling like a prisoner. She climbs out her bedroom window just after midnight, dropping to the grass below where sprinklers have left the lawn damp and fragrant. Lorenzo's car idles at the curb, music playing low from the stereo, and she runs toward it like she's running toward salvation. They drive away into the Miami night, heading south toward the Keys, leaving behind a house that will be empty when Shylock returns from his office, leaving behind a father who will discover in the morning that he's lost his daughter and his money in a single night. The next afternoon, Bassanio arrives at the Montoya mansion, precisely at 4. The sun is high and brutal, turning the white stucco walls nearly blinding. He's dressed in one of his new suits, pale gray linen that breathes in the heat, and he walks up the stone path to the front entrance with his heart hammering. The fountain in the courtyard splashes musically, and somewhere in the property, birds call from the trees. Rosa opens the door and leads him through the house, through rooms filled with antique furniture and family photographs, through hallways where the air conditioning keeps everything cool and preserved. The house smells of flowers and old wood and the faint ghost of cigar smoke. They arrive at the study, and there is Portia, standing by the window in a dress the color of ocean water, her dark hair pulled back, her expression impossible to read. Nerissa is there too, sitting in the corner with a notebook, ready to witness and record. The 3 safes sit on the table, waiting, each one representing a different future, a different fate. Bassanio, Portia says, and there's something in her voice, something that might be hope or fear or both. Are you ready? He crosses the room, and instead of going immediately to the safes, he takes her hand. Before I choose, I need to tell you something. I've spent my whole life choosing the easy path, the obvious answer, the shortcut. I've chosen gold over substance every single time, and it's left me broke and desperate and ashamed. My best friend risked everything so I could stand here today. He signed a contract that could cost him his life, all because he believed I might finally be capable of making the right choice. He releases her hand and turns to the safes, studying them not with confidence, but with genuine uncertainty. The gold safe promises what many men desire. But many men are fools, myself included most of the time. Popularity, obvious wealth, the easy choice, these have never led me anywhere worth going. He moves to the silver safe. This one promises as much as I deserve. But what do I deserve, honestly? I've squandered opportunities, burned through money, lived off the generosity of others. If I got what I deserved, it would probably be nothing. Finally, he stands before the lead safe, dull and heavy and unpromising. This one demands that I give and hazard all I have. And I've realized something, Portia. That's exactly what Antonio did for me. He hazarded everything, not for gold or glory, but for friendship, for love, for the hope that someone he cared about might become better. If I'm going to honor that sacrifice, if I'm going to be worthy of you, then I have to be willing to do the same, to risk everything, to choose based not on what looks valuable, but on what actually is. He reaches for the lead safe and his hand is trembling. This is my choice. Portia's hand covers her mouth, her eyes bright with emotion as Bassanio turns the key in the lead safe. The mechanism clicks, the heavy door swings open, and inside is a velvet-lined compartment containing a photograph of Portia as a child with her father, both of them laughing on a beach somewhere, and beneath it, a letter in her father's handwriting and a diamond engagement ring that catches the afternoon light, streaming through the study windows. Nerissa stands up, her notebook forgotten, a smile breaking across her face. Bassanio pulls out the letter with shaking hands and reads aloud, his voice unsteady with relief and disbelief. You that choose not by the view, chance is fair, and choose as true. Since this fortune falls to you, be content and seek no new. If you be well pleased with this, and hold your fortune for your bliss, turn to where your lady is, and claim her with a loving kiss. Portia crosses to him, and there are tears on her cheeks now. Tears of relief and joy and the release of months of waiting, months of watching men fail her father's test. You chose correctly, she whispers. You saw past the surface. You understood. They kiss in the study while the Miami afternoon blazes outside, while the city continues its business oblivious to this moment, and it's real. Not a transaction or a gain, but something genuine between two people who've both been lost in their own ways. When they pull apart, Bassanio slides the ring onto her finger, and it fits perfectly, as if her father knew all along who would ultimately wear it. I don't deserve this, Bassanio says. I don't deserve you. Then spend your life becoming someone who does, Portia replies, and there's steel beneath the softness in her voice. Become the man your friend believes you can be. They celebrate that evening with dinner on the mansion's terrace overlooking the water, just the four of them, Bassanio and Portia, Nerissa and a young lawyer named Graciano who works for the Montoya legal team and has been courting Nerissa for months. The table is set with white linen and candles, and the food is Cuban, traditional dishes prepared by Rosa. Ropa vieja, black beans and rice, fried plantains, everything rich and flavorful. They drink champagne as the sun sets over the bay, turning the water gold and orange, and finally deep purple as night falls. Graciano proposes to Nerissa between courses, pulling out a modest ring he's been saving for, and she says yes, while laughing and crying simultaneously. It feels like everything is falling into place, like the universe has decided to grant them all a moment of grace. The city lights begin to sparkle across the water. Boats drift past with running lights glowing, and music from somewhere distant carries on the warm breeze. But while they celebrate, disaster is unfolding across the Atlantic. Antonio's ship from Sao Paulo, the one carrying coffee and leather goods, encounters a hurricane in the Caribbean. The storm hits suddenly, a wall of water and wind that tears through the shipping lanes with devastating force. The vessel, despite its modern navigation equipment and experienced crew, is overwhelmed. It goes down in darkness, the cargo lost, the hull ripped apart by waves the size of buildings. The crew is rescued by a Coast Guard helicopter, but the ship and everything in it sinks to the ocean floor. The second ship, returning from Kingston, develops engine trouble and limps into port in Haiti for repairs. The harbor master there, sensing opportunity, impounds the vessel over a disputed docking fee, holding the ship and its cargo hostage for bribes and bureaucratic paperwork that could take months to resolve. Antonio's captain tries everything, calls everyone, but the ship sits in Port-au-Prince, going nowhere while the Haitian officials play their games. The third ship, the one from Buenos Aires with the largest cargo, simply vanishes. No distress call, no wreckage found, just gone somewhere in the South Atlantic. Pirates are suspected, or mechanical failure, or any of a dozen disasters that can befall a vessel at sea. Insurance investigators begin their work, but investigations take time, and time is the one thing Antonio doesn't have. Antonio receives the news in stages, each message worse than the last. First comes the call about the Sao Paulo ship. the captain's voice crackling over a satellite phone connection, explaining through the static about the hurricane, the impossible waves, the miracle that the crew survived it all. Antonio stands in his warehouse office, the phone pressed to his ear, watching the Miami River flow past his window while his world collapses. The second call comes 2 days later. The Kingston ship impounded in Haiti, the cargo rotting in the tropical heat, while officials demand payments he can't authorize from Miami. His lawyer is working on it, filing paperwork, making calls to the State Department. But the wheels turn slowly, and the 3-month deadline is racing toward him like a freight train. The third ship's disappearance is confirmed a week after that. The Coast Guard search finds nothing, no debris field, no oil slick, no sign that the vessel ever existed except for the manifest and the worried families of the crew. The insurance company sends investigators, asks questions, wants documentation, but they won't pay out for months, maybe years if they can claim negligence or suspicious circumstances. Antonio does the math in his office late at night, surrounded by shipping schedules and loan documents and maps of the Caribbean. All his capital is gone. The insurance money, even when it eventually comes, won't arrive in time. He cannot repay Shylock's loan. The realization settles over him like cold water, and he sits in the darkness, watching the lights of the port, accepting his fate with a strange calmness. Meanwhile, Shylock's world has shattered in a different way. He returned home that morning after Jessica's escape to find her bedroom empty, her closet half cleared, his safe standing open with $10,000 missing. The money is one thing, painful but manageable. The loss of his daughter is something else entirely, a wound that cuts deeper than any financial loss ever could. He tears through the house like a man possessed, finding the note she left, reading her accusations and justifications with shaking hands. She writes about feeling imprisoned, about wanting to live her own life, about Lorenzo and their plans to start over somewhere far from Miami. She writes that she's sorry about the money, but she deserves it for years of captivity. She doesn't write that she loves him, doesn't promise to stay in touch, doesn't leave a forwarding address. Shylock drives through Miami searching for her, checking Lorenzo's last known address in Hialeah, questioning neighbors, calling anyone who might know where they went. He reports the theft to the police, but they're uninterested in what they see as a family dispute, a daughter taking money from her father. He hires a private investigator, a burned-out ex-cop who works out of a strip mall office and charges $200 a day plus expenses. The investigation eventually reveals that Jessica and Lorenzo made it to Key West, where they're staying in a cheap motel and spending his money like water. Lorenzo has bought a motorcycle, expensive dinners, rounds of drinks for new friends at beachside bars. Jessica wears new clothes and talks about art school in California, about never going back to Miami, about being free for the first time in her life. The private investigator shows Shylock photographs of his daughter laughing on the back of Lorenzo's motorcycle, her arms around a man Shylock has never met, her face showing a happiness he realizes he never provided. The double loss, his daughter and his money, transforms Shylock's bitterness into something harder and darker. When friends from the Jewish community try to console him, try to tell him that Jessica will come back, that children always return eventually, he pushes them away. When his lawyer suggests he forget the money and focus on rebuilding the relationship, Shylock laughs, a sound without humor. "The money I can replace," he says, sitting in his pawnshop office, surrounded by the accumulated possessions of desperate people. But the trust, the love, those are gone forever. She chose a Christian boy over her own father. She stole from me to fund her escape, and all of Miami is laughing. I can hear them, the Jew whose daughter ran away, the money lender whose own family robbed him. When the 3-month deadline arrives, Antonio knows he cannot pay. He's liquidated everything he can, borrowed from every friend except Bassanio, whom he's kept deliberately in the dark about the disaster. But it's not enough, not even close. He sits in his warehouse office on the morning the payment is due, watching the sun rise over the port, turning the water pink and gold, and he thinks about the contract he signed, about the pound of flesh he promised. He calls Shylock at 9 in the morning, the phone ringing 4 times before the loan shark answers. "I can't pay," Antonio says simply. "My ships are gone. My capital is lost. I'm ruined." There's a long silence on the line, and when Shylock speaks, his voice is cold and empty. Then we proceed according to the contract. 1 pound of flesh from your body, Antonio. You signed the bond. You agreed to the terms. You can't be serious, Shylock. This is insane. Take my business, take whatever assets I have left, but you can't actually cut flesh from my body. No court will allow it. We'll see what the court allows, Shylock replies. My lawyers are already filing the paperwork. I'm calling in the bond, Antonio. You treated me like dirt for years, and now you'll learn that words have consequences. That contempt has a price. Antonio tries reasoning with him, offers him everything he has, offers to work for years to repay the money with interest. But Shylock is immovable. The call ends, and Antonio sits in the silence of his office, understanding that he's not dealing with a rational businessman anymore. He's dealing with a man whose world has been destroyed, who has nothing left but revenge. The news reaches Bassanio and Portia at the mansion in Coconut Grove. Bassanio receives the call from one of Antonio's employees, a warehouse manager who's frantic with worry. Bassanio's face goes white as he listens, his hand gripping the phone so hard his knuckles turn pale. When he hangs up, Portia is standing beside him, reading the disaster in his expression. What happened? Antonio. The ships. Everything's gone. He can't repay the loan. Bassanio's voice is hollow, shocked. Shylock is demanding his pound of flesh. He's actually going to try to enforce the bond. Portia's mind immediately shifts into analytical mode, the Yale education and years of watching her father navigate complex business deals kicking in. He can't. It's not legally enforceable. You can't contract for bodily harm. Shylock's lawyers seem to think otherwise, Bassanio says, pacing the room like a caged animal. Antonio signed it willingly, in front of witnesses, with a notary. It's a valid contract. And Shylock isn't asking for money anymore. He wants blood. Portia moves to her father's desk and begins making phone calls. She knows judges, lawyers, people who owe the Montoya family favors. Within hours, she's assembled a picture of the legal situation, and it's worse than she expected. The contract is indeed valid. Antonio signed it of sound mind, with full knowledge of the terms. The penalty clause, bizarre as it is, was agreed to by both parties. If Shylock wants to pursue it, he can take it to court, and the court will have to rule on whether the bond can be enforced. The case is set for hearing in federal court in downtown Miami, in one of those imposing buildings on Flagler Street, where justice moves with bureaucratic slowness. The date is set for 1 week away. And in that time, all of Miami's business community begins taking sides. Some support Antonio, the legitimate merchant who's always played by the rules. Others support Shylock, pointing out that a contract is a contract, that Antonio knew the risks, that you can't just walk away from obligations because they become inconvenient. Bassanio visits Antonio at his apartment, a modest place in Coral Gables, where the merchant has lived simply despite his wealth. Antonio looks older, worn down by stress and acceptance. They sit on the balcony overlooking a courtyard with a pool, drinking coffee while the morning heat builds. "This is my fault," Bassanio says, his voice breaking. "You did this for me. You signed that insane contract so I could pursue Portia, and now you're going to die because of it." "I'm not going to die," Antonio says calmly. "Even Shylock isn't crazy enough to kill me in a courtroom. But he'll take his pound of flesh, he'll leave his mark, and I'll carry the scar for the rest of my life. That's the price of my contempt, Bassanio. All those years of treating him as less than human, it's come due. The federal courthouse in downtown Miami is a brutalist concrete structure from the 1970s, all sharp angles and small windows, designed to intimidate rather than inspire. Inside, the courtrooms are oak-paneled and formal, with the seal of the United States mounted on the wall behind the judge's bench, with flags standing in the corners with the weight of law pressing down on everything. Courtroom 6 on the 3rd floor is where the matter of Stein versus Vasquez will be heard, a civil case that has attracted unexpected attention from the media and the business community. The morning of the hearing, protesters gather outside the courthouse. Some carry signs supporting Antonio. Contracts can't require mutilation and justice not revenge. Others support Shylock, honor all contracts, and end discrimination against Jewish businesses. The local news stations have cameras set up, interviewing people on both sides, turning a contract dispute into a referendum on prejudice, debt, and the limits of legal obligations. Inside the courtroom, Antonio sits at the defendant's table with his lawyer, a public defender named Martinez who's overworked and underpaid, but believes genuinely in his client's cause. Antonio wears a simple suit, and his face shows a resignation that's almost peaceful. He's made his peace with whatever happens here today. Shylock sits at the plaintiff's table with his attorney, the nervous Feldman who drew up the original contract. Shylock looks terrible, gray-faced and hollow-eyed, a man who hasn't slept properly in weeks. The loss of Jessica has carved something essential out of him, leaving only bitterness and the need to see this contract enforced. He clutches a leather briefcase containing the bond, the notarized document that gives him legal claim to Antonio's flesh. The judge is Evelyn Rodriguez, a Cuban-American woman in her late 50s with a reputation for fairness and a no-nonsense approach to her courtroom. She's presided over drug cases, money laundering cases, immigration cases, every variety of crime and civil dispute that flows through Miami's federal system. But this case is unique in her experience, and she approaches the bench with visible concern. Bassanio sits in the gallery with Portia beside him, both of them tense and helpless. Nerissa is there too, and Graciano, a small group of supporters watching a man's life hang in the balance, over a contract that seems pulled from medieval times rather than modern America. This court is now in session, Judge Rodriguez announces, her voice carrying authority. We're here to determine the enforceability of a contract between Shylock Stein, plaintiff, and Antonio Vasquez, defendant. Mr. Feldman, you may present your case. Feldman stands, adjusting his glasses nervously, and begins laying out the facts. The loan of $25,000 made in good faith. The 3-month repayment period. A defendant's failure to repay. The penalty clause agreed to by both parties with full knowledge and understanding, witnessed and notarized. He presents the contract itself, passes copies to the judge, walks through every element of its formation. Your Honor, this is a valid contract under Florida law, Feldman argues. Both parties were of sound mind. Both agreed to the terms willingly, and there was no coercion or fraud. The fact that the penalty clause is unusual doesn't make it unenforceable. Mr. Vasquez gambled that his ships would return safely. He lost that gamble. My client is entitled to the remedy specified in the contract. Martinez stands to respond, his voice passionate and outraged. Your Honor, this court cannot possibly enforce a contract that requires physical mutilation. We're not living in the Dark Ages. There are limits to what parties can agree to, limits on contractual freedom. You cannot contract to harm another person, no matter how willingly they sign. The legal arguments go back and forth, citations of case law and statutory interpretation, debates about contract formation and public policy, and the limits of agreements. Judge Rodriguez listens carefully, taking notes, her expression revealing nothing about which way she's leaning. During a brief recess, Portia excuses herself from the gallery, whispering to Bassigno that she needs to make a phone call. She leaves the courtroom and finds a payphone in the courthouse hallway, dialing a number she's memorized. When court resumes, Judge Rodriguez leans forward, her hands folded on the bench. I've reviewed the contract and the relevant case law. While this is highly unusual, I find that the contract appears to be valid on its face. Both parties entered into it freely, with full knowledge of the terms. However, before I make a final ruling, I want to hear from an expert in contract law. I'm told we have someone available. The courtroom door opens and a young man enters dressed in an expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase. He's Latino, mid-20s, with sharp eyes and an air of confidence that fills the room. He introduces himself as Balthazar Montenegro, a contract law specialist from the University of Miami School of Law, who's been consulting on the case. What no one in the courtroom knows, except Nerissa, who sits in the gallery trying to suppress a smile, is that Balthazar Montenegro is actually Portia Montoya in disguise. She spent the recess transforming herself in the courthouse bathroom, slicking her hair back with gel, using makeup to create subtle shadows that masculinize her features, adding a fake mustache purchased from a costume shop on Cale Ocho, and putting on a suit borrowed from Graciano's wardrobe. The transformation isn't perfect up close, but in the formal setting of the courtroom, from a distance, it's convincing enough. Your Honor, if I may address the court, Portia says, pitching her voice lower, adopting a slight accent, everything calculated to obscure her identity. I've studied this contract extensively, and I believe there's a solution that serves both the letter of the law and the interests of justice. Judge Rodriguez nods. Proceed, Mr. Montenegro. Portia approaches the bench, her movements confident, masculine, every gesture studied. The contract is indeed valid. Mr. Stein is entitled to his pound of flesh, as agreed. However, the contract must be followed precisely, exactly as written, with no deviation whatsoever. Shylock sits up straighter, a bitter smile crossing his face. Finally, someone who understands that contracts mean something. Indeed they do, Portia agrees, turning to face him directly. So let us examine exactly what your contract entitles you to. You may take 1 pound of flesh, no more, no less. Precisely 1 pound. If you take more, even by a fraction of an ounce, you're in violation of the contract and subject to criminal charges for assault. Feldman shifts uncomfortably, sensing a trap, but not yet seeing its shape. My client understands. 1 pound exactly. Furthermore, Portia continues, her voice gaining strength, the contract specifies flesh only, not blood. Nowhere in this document does it grant you the right to spill Antonio Vasquez's blood. So you must take your pound of flesh without drawing a single drop of blood. If even 1 drop falls, you've violated the terms of the contract and will face charges for attempted murder under Florida law. The courtroom goes silent as the impossibility of the task becomes clear. You cannot cut flesh from a living person without drawing blood. You cannot measure exactly 1 pound while performing the operation without the risk of taking more or less. The contract, followed with absolute precision, is impossible to execute. Shylock stands, his face flushing with anger. This is a trick, a legal manipulation. The spirit of the contract is clear. The spirit? Portia challenges, her voice sharp. You demanded the letter of the law, Mr. Stein. You insisted that every word of the contract be honored. Very well. Let every word be honored. You have the right to your pound of flesh, so take it, here in this courtroom right now. Take it without shedding blood, measure it to exactly 1 pound, and it's yours. But fail in either requirement, and you face criminal prosecution. Judge Rodriguez leans back in her chair, and something like admiration crosses her face. Mr. Montenegro makes an excellent point. The contract must be executed as written, not as intended. Mr. Stein, are you prepared to claim your penalty under these conditions? Shylock stands frozen, staring at Antonio, then at the young lawyer who has trapped him with his own words. The courtroom is absolutely silent, everyone waiting for his response. Slowly the rage drains from his face, replaced by something that looks like exhaustion, like defeat, like the final collapse of a man who has nothing left to lose. I cannot, he says quietly. It's impossible. You know it's impossible. Then you forfeit your claim, Judge Rodriguez rules, bringing her gavel down with a sharp crack that echoes through the courtroom. The penalty clause cannot be executed as written. Therefore, it is void. Mr. Vasquez, you are released from this obligation. However, she continues, her voice hardening, there are other matters to address. She shuffles through papers on her bench, finding a different document. Mr. Stein, I've been made aware of certain irregularities in your lending practices. It appears you've been operating without proper licensing under Florida's consumer protection statutes. Furthermore, the terms of this particular contract, while creative, constitute an attempt to collect a debt through threat of bodily harm, which violates federal lending laws. Feldman jumps to his feet. Your Honor, my client had no intention of actually collecting the penalty. It was meant to be symbolic. Symbolic? Judge Rodriguez's voice cuts like ice. He brought this case to federal court, demanding enforcement. That's not symbolic, counselor. That's attempted assault with legal paperwork. I'm referring this matter to the U.S. Attorney's Office for investigation. Additionally, I'm ordering Mr. Stein to forfeit half of his assets to the state of Florida as penalty for illegal lending practices, and the other half to Mr. Vasquez as compensation for emotional distress and legal costs. The ruling is devastating. Shylock sinks into his chair, and for a moment he looks like he might collapse entirely. Everything he built, everything his father started, wiped away in an instant. His daughter gone, his money forfeit, his business destroyed. Antonio stands slowly, and instead of triumph in his face, there's something else. Something that looks like shame. Your Honor, I don't want his money. I don't want his business destroyed. Judge Rodriguez raises an eyebrow. Mr. Vasquez, this court has ruled. Then let me propose an alternative, Antonio says, his voice gaining strength. Let Mr. Stein keep half his assets to maintain his business. Let the state take what they require. But the half that would come to me, I want it held in trust for his daughter Jessica. When she comes back, and she will come back eventually, she has something waiting for her. Something her father built. That's my condition for accepting the court's ruling. For the first time, Shylock looks directly at Antonio, and there's something broken in his expression. Something that might be gratitude, or might be the last fragments of his pride shattering. He nods, unable to speak. Judge Rodriguez considers this, then nods her approval. So ordered. This court is adjourned. The gavel falls one final time, and the courtroom erupts in conversation. Reporters rush out to file their stories. Antonio is surrounded by supporters, by Bassanio embracing him with tears streaming down his face, by friends who thought they'd lost him. Shylock gathers his papers with shaking hands and leaves through a side door, Feldman trailing behind him. Both men understanding that while Shylock kept his physical body intact, everything else has been stripped away. Outside in the courthouse hallway, Balthazar Montenegro slips into the women's bathroom. Minutes later, Portia emerges, her hair freed from its gel, the mustache removed, the masculine suit replaced by the dress she wore beneath it. She finds Bassanio in the crowd, and when he sees her, understanding dawns across his face. "That was you," he breathes. "The lawyer. That was you. Did you think I'd let Antonio sacrifice himself for our happiness?" she asks, taking his hand. "Your friend gave everything so you could win me. The least I could do was use my education to save his life." They leave the courthouse together, emerging into the Miami afternoon where the sun blazes down on Flagler Street, and the city continues its endless motion. Tourists take photographs of the courthouse steps, unaware of the drama that just concluded inside. Traffic flows past, horns honking, the sounds of the city rising like a symphony of chaos and life.